The desert sun was brutal that morning, blinding, unrelenting, and so hot the horizon itself seemed to ripple. Emma Price was used to harsh weather. She wasn't used to streaks of light falling out of the sky like dying stars. She first noticed it over the ridge, a silent trail of fire arcing too slowly to be a meteor, too gracefully to be a crashing plane. It vanished behind the sandstone hills, leaving behind a strange afterglow that shimmered even in daylight. Emma pulled over. She wasn't the kind of woman who ignored strange things. Years ago, she had worked as a trauma counselor, specializing in abduction cases, dreams, and experiences people were too afraid to admit in daylight. Now, she taught art therapy to children with memories they couldn't explain. Some said they'd seen other worlds. Some drew symbols before they could write their own names. But even that hadn't prepared her for what lay beyond that ridge. Burned shrubs, a groove in the red earth, smoke. And in the middle of it all, something that wasn't metal. The object was cracked open like a seed pod split too soon. Its surface shimmered like organic glass, smooth, curved, not riveted like a machine, but grown. And beneath its broken wing, cradled like a wounded hatchling, was something that looked like a child. Emma froze. It was small, no taller than a 6-year-old, but strange, not monstrous, not grotesque, just wrong in the subtle ways that made her instincts fire. Smooth, pale skin, eyes too large, no visible nose, limbs long and thin, but folded in a very human way. It looked up at her and flinched. Its side was bleeding something that looked like light. Emma didn't scream. She didn't call anyone. She stepped forward. Its eyes met hers, wide, luminous, filled with something she hadn't expected. Terror, vulnerability, and beneath it, trust. She carried it to her truck. She didn't know why. Maybe some maternal instinct, maybe madness. But she knew, deep in her gut, that calling the authorities would not end in kindness. It never did. Not with things people couldn't explain. 2 hours later, Emma pulled into her remote home, a house buried in the desert, miles from town. No neighbors, no phone lines. Just her work, and now this child. It didn't speak, not with its mouth. But by sunset, Emma began to feel it, like a soft tapping inside her thoughts. Images, memories, emotions that weren't hers. Gentle, curious, in pain. And a word, not its name. His. Jesus. By the third day, the child was stronger. It moved with a delicate grace, always silent, always watching. Emma had set up a small space for it in her sunroom, soft blankets, filtered light, and the only thing she could think to offer, art supplies. It didn't react at first. The crayons, the watercolors, the piles of blank sketch paper, untouched. Until the storm came. Desert storms don't creep in, they crash. Thunder cracked like a divine drumbeat overhead, and lightning split the sky in strobe-lit fury. Emma was in the kitchen when she felt it. A pressure behind her eyes, a sudden surge of emotion that wasn't hers. She turned. The child was sitting on the floor, a piece of charcoal gripped awkwardly in its long fingers. Its hand trembled. It began to draw. Emma didn't interrupt. Line after line spread across the paper in near silence. There was no hesitation, no testing of strokes, just movement, urgent and fluid. It wasn't drawing the ship, or itself, or the desert. It was drawing a man. But not like any man Emma had seen before. He wore robes, yes, but the lines around him pulsed. Not aura, not shadow, something else. His eyes were immense, not with size, but with scale. Entire galaxies swirling inside them, stars spinning like a divine iris. Behind him, strange shapes coiled and twisted in sacred symmetry. Symbols Emma couldn't name, but felt in her bones. Time seemed to freeze as she watched the image emerge. She stepped closer, heart pounding. When the child finished, it pushed the paper toward her. Emma dropped to her knees. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. The man on the page wasn't just a figure. It was a presence, a being. He radiated warmth, not ink. Purpose, not posture. He looked human, but wasn't. Not entirely. And that's when the child reached out and gently touched her wrist. The room disappeared. Emma saw space, not the empty void of science textbooks, but a living cosmos. She felt time bend. She saw the man again, that same man, standing in fields of light, walking among stars, touching the foreheads of beings that weren't human, but knelt before him all the same. And she heard the whisper, clear, calm, inside her mind, but deeper than thought. You remember him as a man. We remember him as a traveler, a teacher, a bringer of frequency. He walked your world as he walked ours, wearing your skin to speak your language. The vision snapped. She was back in her sunroom, knees aching on the tile. The child was crying, silently, just tears, silver trails on alien cheeks. Emma reached out, pulled it close. The paper still lay between them, a sketch of Jesus, glowing with stars. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The drawing sat on her desk under a soft lamp glow, and no matter how many times she looked away, her eyes kept finding their way back. There was something about it, something in the lines, the balance, the presence. It was more than art. It was code. She didn't know how she knew that. She just did. The child slept curled beneath the window, surrounded by torn pages and scattered chalk. But even asleep, it hummed. Not aloud, not physically, but something in the room pulsed with energy, an ambient vibration that moved through Emma's chest like a second heartbeat. Every time she stepped closer, the feeling intensified. She sat near it, wrapped in a blanket, and closed her eyes. Then it began. Images, flashes, a mountain of light too brilliant to look at, a chamber inside the earth filled with echoes not of sound but memory, a garden, lush but wrong, plants not known to any botany on earth, their leaves moving as if in response to thought. And then the voice again. You know him through scripture, but we remember him through resonance. Emma whispered, almost without thinking, "Who was he to you?" A pause. Then, one of the first to remember who he truly was. A human who awakened, who carried source without distortion. She felt the words not as language, but geometry, spirals, frequencies, shapes that weren't shapes, but truths in form. And then something shifted, literally. The air in front of the child shimmered. Emma watched, breath caught. The room around them flickered, briefly, like a signal tuning, and suddenly, hanging in the center of the room, appeared a form of light, holographic, tall, radiating warmth, familiar. It was him, the same man from the drawing, but moving, alive. His robe shimmered in ways fabric shouldn't. His eyes were stars, gentle, endless. He raised one hand, not in greeting, but in remembrance. And then, like a voice rolling through her cells, Emma felt the phrase, "You are not separate. You never were." The image blinked out. The child stirred, opened its eyes. No fear, only peace. It looked at her, and this time it spoke, out loud, in perfect English, quiet, soft, but unmistakable. He was not sent to save you. He came to remind you that you were never lost. Emma began to cry. not from fear, from recognition. The next morning, Emma awoke on the floor with the child curled beside her, as if it had sensed the weight of her dreams and anchored her through the night. The air in the house had changed. It was denser, still, but not oppressive, charged, like the calm after lightning, like standing in a cathedral alone at sunrise. She made tea. The child watched. It didn't speak again, but it didn't need to. As the kettle hissed and the steam curled upward, Emma felt it, a whisper in her mind, subtle and strange. Not a sentence, a memory. But it wasn't hers. She saw a place, vast and silent, stars swirling above a violet sky, structures like woven crystal, beings, tall, radiant, kneeling before a glowing figure who radiated not command, but invitation. It was him again, not in robes, but in light. And in that place, wherever it was, he taught not with words, but with presence, with touch, with stillness. And they listened. "This is what you call heaven," the child said suddenly. Emma turned. It hadn't moved its mouth, but its voice, quiet and aged, was inside her skull like soft thunder. "But it is not a place. It is a state, a field of memory you've forgotten." She sat down, stunned. "Then what is Earth?" A pause. "A school, a mirror, a veil, but also a seed." Emma stared. A seed of what? The child touched its chest, its version of a heart, and said, "Of what you all were, of what he came to remind you you could be again." She felt dizzy. She thought of churches. She thought of sermons and stained glass, and the stories she'd heard as a child, of heaven far above and humanity far below. But this was different. "Why me?" she asked. The child looked at her, those star-deep eyes blinking slowly. "Because you never forgot how to feel, and that is the beginning of remembrance." It handed her a second drawing. This one was different. It wasn't a person. It was Earth. But Earth seen from above. And around it, spiraling like sacred orbitals, were patterns of energy, layers of consciousness, webs of light. And in the center of those lines, sitting silently, was the same figure again. Jesus, smiling, not down at the world, but with it. Emma didn't speak for hours. She just sat in the sunroom, staring at the second drawing while the child slept on the rug nearby. Her tea had gone cold. Time itself seemed to stretch in both directions, as if everything she'd believed, everything she'd trusted, was being slowly dismantled and rebuilt in layers she couldn't yet see. And then, around sunset, the child woke. It sat up, alert, as if called by something Emma couldn't hear. She turned to it. "Is he alive?" The child nodded. "He was never dead, not in the way you think. He left the body behind, yes, but not the field." Emma blinked. "The field?" The child stood, walked over to her desk, placed both hands on the wooden surface. The lights in the room dimmed, not from power failure, but as if the air itself had shifted frequencies. And then, a glow. Not from the child, from the drawing. Lines began to lift off the paper, flickering like holographic thread. Shapes moved, expanded. Symbols aligned themselves into patterns Emma could barely process. Spirals nested within spirals, a geometry of truth. A third image formed, above the paper, suspended in glowing blue-white light. It wasn't a drawing. It was a scroll. But not of parchment or ink. This one shimmered like stardust suspended in liquid time. And across its surface, Emma saw languages she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. She gasped, "It's alive!" The child nodded solemnly. "It is a star scroll, one of the records, a piece of the memory field encoded before the veil. This one belongs to your planet." Emma stepped closer. Her body trembled as she neared the image. Lines of light curved toward her, wrapping around her like DNA. She saw scenes, not static, but moving, living parables. A carpenter speaking to a group of children under a fig tree. A healer weeping beside the bed of a dying soldier. A traveler touching the soil of worlds Emma had never seen. And through all of it, Jesus, not worshipped, not elevated, but remembered. Not as a God above, but a guide beside. "What is this showing me?" she whispered. "His actual walk," the child replied. "Not what was written, not what was changed, but what happened. The field remembers everything, and now, so do you." Emma felt tears fall, not from fear, from the weight of truth, from the aching, beautiful realization that everything she'd ever hoped about Jesus was too small, and that the real truth was far, far bigger. That night, Emma stood barefoot in the sand just beyond her house, the stars stretching endlessly above her like a cathedral of light. The desert was silent, eerily so. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Behind her, the child remained inside, seated in quiet meditation beside the floating star scroll, which pulsed softly like a living heartbeat in the room. Emma closed her eyes. And again, it came. Not a voice, not a word, but presence. It poured through her like warm water, filled her bones, and behind her closed lids, she saw him, Jesus. Not as a man in robes, not as a figure of suffering, but as a being of remembrance, radiant, grounded, ancient, joyful. He smiled, not at her, through her. Because suddenly she understood. She wasn't just seeing him, she was becoming aware of him inside her, like a memory she hadn't yet remembered. And then the child's voice behind her. "You are not here to reach him. He never left. The lie is distance." She turned, tears tracking down her cheeks. But the crucifixion was not an ending. It was an opening. The child stepped into the moonlight, its large eyes reflecting constellations. Its voice was soft, but carried the weight of eons. "Your world teaches separation, heaven above, man below, God afar. But this was never the truth. Jesus did not come to bridge the gap. He came to reveal there was never a gap at all." Emma's knees buckled. The desert sand caught her fall. She sobbed, not from sorrow, but from relief. The kind of relief that only comes when the weight you've carried your whole life is finally, mercifully revealed to be an illusion. "He said he was the way," she whispered. The child nodded. "He is the way, but not to escape this place. He is the way back to yourself." And then it stepped forward, held out its small, strange hand. Emma took it. In that moment, she saw herself. Not the woman who had hidden in the desert, not the trauma counselor, not the skeptic, not even the seeker. She saw herself as light, infinite, loved, and unforgotten. The next day began with silence. Not absence, but alignment. Emma moved through her home like someone who had awoken in a world where everything had shifted half an inch to the left. The floor still creaked, the kettle still hissed, but beneath it all there was a tone, a resonance she couldn't unhear now, a hum beneath the ordinary. The child watched her from the corner of the room, its drawing tools scattered like sacred artifacts across the floor. The star scroll still floated nearby, softly flickering like a candle lit in an unseen wind. Emma sat. She didn't speak at first. Then finally, "Why me?" The child blinked slowly, then turned its head to the side, as if listening to something Emma couldn't hear. "Because your frequency cracked early," it said. "And when a soul fractures in the right way, it can begin to let the light in." Emma swallowed. "You mean my pain?" "Yes, your grief, your loneliness, your sense of being left behind. Those are fractures, and the light finds entry through fracture more easily than through pride." She looked down. Her hands trembled. "Then I've been broken this whole time?" The child stepped forward, placed its palm against her heart. "No," it said, "you've been ready." In that moment, Emma felt a surge, not emotion, not thought, but knowing. Memories she had buried, not of events, but of truths, that the soul is older than time, that she had known him, not in stories, not in sermons, but before, in the place before places. And she remembered her childhood prayers in a dark room, her questions that no one could answer, the dreams of stars calling her name. "Tell me," she whispered, "what is Jesus?" The child's answer was instant. A frequency, a field of coherence, a living key in human form. He came to reactivate the code inside you. Emma blinked, stunned. What code? The child turned and gestured toward the floating star scroll. And this time, it did not just glow. It sang. A sound rose into the air, notes layered upon notes, like a choir of voices without mouths. Not in a language she knew, but one her body recognized. Her skin prickled, her breath hitched, and she felt it, something inside her unlock. Like a door creaking open in her chest, like a memory beginning to return. She gasped, and from somewhere within, so deep it felt like forever, she heard his voice. "I never left you. I simply waited for you to remember." Emma collapsed forward, weeping into her hands. The child stood still, surrounded with light. That night, the house was still, but not empty. The child no longer spoke aloud. It didn't need to. Its presence had merged with Emma's awareness so fully, it felt like they were two notes vibrating on the same string. She lit a single candle on her desk. The star scroll floated above it. Emma stood before it as one might before an altar, not to worship, but to remember. And the child said, without speaking, "You are ready." The star scroll expanded, the symbols on its surface realigned, and suddenly it parted, revealing a chamber of light behind its image. A portal, not in space, but in consciousness. Emma stepped forward. There was no sound, no wind, no shift of gravity. And yet, she passed through. She stood in a vast room with no walls. The floor beneath her was made of starlight. The ceiling was herself, mirrored across infinite fractals, a living cathedral of memory, woven from the forgotten truths of her own being. She saw glyphs suspended in the air, pulsing, spinning, and at the center, a throne. But it was empty. No crown, no figure, just light. And as she stepped closer, she realized the throne wasn't his, it was hers. Every being had one, a place not of rule, but of remembrance. She turned. The child stood beside her now, though it hadn't walked. "He never came to be above you," it said. "He came to awaken the temple within you." Emma's breath caught. The church, the rituals, the prayers, were they all wrong? The child shook its head slowly. Not wrong, just incomplete. Pieces of the map, but not the destination. She looked down at her own hands and saw them glowing, not with power, with recognition. A warmth radiated from her chest, pulsing outward in soft waves. her memories, her grief, her questions, they weren't obstacles. They were the keys. The throne wasn't a reward, it was a mirror. And in that mirror, she saw him again, Jesus, not sitting above, but standing beside, smiling. And then he spoke. You are the temple, and I am the light inside it. Emma opened her eyes. She was back in her sunroom. But something had changed. The walls felt wider, though they hadn't moved. The air felt charged, though nothing buzzed. Everything was the same, but now it meant something. The child stood across from her, arms at its sides, silent. You showed me something, she whispered. Something I didn't know I was searching for. The child nodded. You were never lost, Emma, just distracted. She smiled. It was the first true smile she'd worn in years, not of politeness or defense or endurance, but of presence. The child turned back to the star scroll, now dimming, its light folding back inward, returning to stillness. It's closing? She asked. It was never open to show you answers, the child replied, only to remind you of what you already carried. Emma sat down beside it, quiet, still, listening. And then, without warning, the child reached for her hand and placed something in her palm. It was a stone, small, smooth, carved with a symbol she didn't recognize, yet somehow new. A spiral within a spiral. What is this? The child answered gently. The memory seed. It holds the vibration of what you've remembered. You won't need me once it roots. Emma's throat caught. Are you leaving? The child tilted its head. Not in sadness, but in love. I was never here to stay. My presence activated yours. My message is not for the masses. It is for those ready to feel. And now you are one of them. She clutched the stone to her heart. Will I ever see you again? The child turned to the window. Outside, the stars were rising. I am in every child who asks without shame, in every drawing made with awe, in every tear shed for something remembered but not yet named. It looked back. And when you meet others who remember, you will recognize them, not by doctrine, not by words, but by the light in their eyes. Emma nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. But what do I do now? The child gave the final teaching. Live as if the veil is already gone. Then it turned, walked toward the door, and as it stepped into the starlit desert, it shimmered, fading into light, folding back into the space between atoms. Gone. But not lost. Never lost. Emma stood alone, but she had never felt less alone in her entire life. Days passed. The house grew quieter, but never empty. Emma moved like someone who had been rewoven, each action, each breath threaded with awareness. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. How could she? She tried. She even sat down to write a letter to an old friend, a theologian who once joked that God might be hiding in the stars. But every word felt too small, too flattened. Because how do you explain something that happened not to you, but through you? Instead, she focused on the work. She reopened her art therapy practice, quietly. No announcements, just a note slipped to a few old clients. I'm back. Bring your children. And they came. Some out of desperation, some out of intuition. All of them carrying what Emma now saw clearly, the spark, the fragments of knowing. The first child drew spirals without being told. Another hummed tones she swore matched the memory frequency the star scroll had emitted. One girl, mute since birth, painted a glowing man with eyes like galaxies and a robe made of light. Emma said nothing. She simply listened. And when the time was right, she handed each of them a smooth, flat stone. Spiraled. Memory seeds. They never questioned. Children don't question what they already know. One night, months later, Emma stood on her rooftop watching the stars. She held her own stone. The drawing of Jesus still hung in her studio. Not framed, not displayed, just there, waiting. She traced a finger over the lines. The man's face shimmered. He wasn't just a savior, or a teacher, or a symbol. He was a reminder that the sacred is not somewhere else. It is here, in us, in the breath between thoughts, in the light behind closed eyes, in every child who dreams of skies they've never flown, and in every heart that dares to remember what it is, not just what it was told. Emma turned back to the stars. Somewhere, out there, or maybe right here, something watched, waited, smiled. And in the silence, she felt it again. You are not waiting to be saved. You are waking up to who you've always been. It began subtly. Emails, letters. One slipped under her door with no return address, just a hand-drawn spiral and a single line. I saw him, too. At first, Emma thought it was coincidence. But then, more came. A young woman from Arizona sent a charcoal sketch of the same being, the same glowing man with galaxies in his eyes. A widowed pastor from Kenya mailed a worn journal filled with dreams of floating temples and a voice that called itself the Memory of Light. A child in Brazil, barely 5, painted a map of stars that matched no constellation known to science except one seen briefly in the Star Scroll vision. Emma didn't seek them, but they found her, and every single one carried the same unspoken signature. They remembered. Not the doctrine, not the dogma, but him, the frequency, the presence, the stillness beneath the storm. She called them the others. They weren't followers, they weren't converts. They were witnesses to something deeper than belief, to something ancient awakening within modern hearts. Emma began compiling their stories, not to publish, not yet, but to preserve, to protect, to prepare, because something was building. She could feel it in her bones, in the soft hum that never quite left her since the child disappeared into starlight, like the ringing of a bell too deep to hear with ears. A convergence, a remembering. One autumn morning, Emma woke with a jolt, not from a dream, from a calling. She sat up, heart racing, not in fear, in certainty. The memory seed in her hand glowed faintly. She had kept it by her bedside, always, but now its spiral shimmered with blue-white light. And behind her eyes she saw the child again. Not in her house, in a chamber of stars. It's time, the voice said. The veil is thin. The ones who carry the code must now find one another. Emma stood, trembling. Not because she was afraid, but because she had been waiting for this her whole life and never known it. The journey began without a destination. There was no map, no invitation, only a deep, pulsing knowing that tugged Emma forward, like gravity with a heartbeat. She packed lightly, a few changes of clothes, her journal, the memory seed, and the original drawing. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't have to. Those who remembered would understand. Those who didn't would feel it soon. The coordinates came in a dream. Not numbers, images. A stone arch in the desert. A mountain with a wound carved into its side. A place where lightning met sky, not in violence, but in communion. When Emma awoke, she drew it. 3 hours later, she found it on a geological survey map. A real place. Utah, high desert, remote, forgotten. She drove. The moment she arrived, she knew. The air shimmered. Not with heat, but with intention. She stepped from her truck and stood at the edge of a vast open canyon. At its center rose a single outcropping of stone, jagged like a shard of bone piercing the sky. And beneath it, campfires, tents, people, already gathered, already waiting. They came from everywhere. A woman from Nepal who had seen the spiral in a vision during prayer. A teenage boy from Norway who had dreams of a light being calling him brother. A blind man from Tennessee who painted in colors he'd never seen, capturing the exact geometry of the star scroll. They didn't speak the same language, but they understood the same message. Emma walked toward the center fire. No one asked who she was. They simply made space. She sat down. And for a moment, no one spoke. Only the crackle of flame, only the hush of the desert wind, only the hum of something ancient and alive rising between them. And then, someone began to sing. No lyrics, just tone. Clear, steady, pure. Another joined in, then another, until the canyon echoed with a resonance that wasn't performance, it was remembrance. Emma closed her eyes, held the memory seed to her heart, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone who remembered. She felt like someone who was remembered. The song didn't end. It evolved. What began as a single tone became a lattice of frequencies, weaving through the canyon like light made audible. It wasn't music, it was architecture, sound shaping space, memory rethreading reality. And Emma felt it, in her bones, in her breath, in the way the ground beneath her seemed to soften, not physically, but dimensionality itself giving way, folding like a page turning into something new. The others sat in stillness, eyes closed, bodies swaying slightly. No one led, no one followed. They were tuning themselves, like instruments, into something larger. The memory seed in Emma's hand pulsed, once, twice, then it bloomed. Not with petals, with light. The spiral symbol rose from it in the air, glowing, rotating slowly as if carried on invisible winds. Others opened their eyes, gasps, tears, smiles that had waited lifetimes. The spiral began to duplicate, echoes of itself unfurling above every fire pit, over every tent, above every person who had come. Each one unique, each one the same. The child appeared, not as a figure walking through camp, but as light standing among them, silent, present, shimmering in soft silver and indigo hues. No mouth, but the voice came anyway. You've remembered the frequency. Now remember the function. Emma stood. So did others. Not from command, from recognition. You are not here to be saved, the voice continued. You are here to become the saviors of yourselves, of each other, not through conquest, but coherence. The spirals above their heads synchronized. The air thickened, not heavy, but holy. The child raised its hand, and above the canyon, a dome of light began to form. Not physical, but felt. A resonance field, ancient and intelligent. Inside it, memories returned. Of Jesus, not just as teacher, but as activator, one who reminded humans not of what to worship, but of what they already were. He hadn't come to replace them. He had come to mirror them, to awaken the Christ code buried inside their very cells. And now it was reigniting. Emma wept, not from sadness, but from completeness. The journey hadn't ended here. It had only begun, and for the first time, she knew the truth not just in her mind, but in her entire being. They were never meant to follow the light. They were meant to become it. The dome of resonance shimmered across the sky, silent, invisible to the world outside, yet unmistakably real to those within. Emma stood at the heart of it, surrounded by the others, all of them breathing in rhythm, not by practice, but by presence. Their chests rose and fell as one, like waves drawn to a central gravity. The child moved to the center. Or rather, the light that had once taken the shape of the child. It now stood taller, less distinct in form, more like a silhouette etched in starlight. It radiated familiarity. It carried him, not as a replica, but as a reminder. It raised both arms, and from the center of its being, a pulse expanded outward. Not sound, not light, something deeper. Understanding. Each person felt it differently. A mother saw her stillborn child smiling, whole. A soldier felt the weight of his guilt dissolve like sand in wind. A blind girl opened her eyes, not to sight, but to vision. Emma felt her life rewind, not as regret, but as restoration. Every wound she'd carried was not erased, but woven into something purposeful, holy. She collapsed to her knees. And then he appeared. Not the child, not the light. Him, Jesus, standing in the center of the gathering. No wings, no thunder, just a robe, bare feet, eyes vast as oceans and deeper than time. He didn't speak. He remembered them. One by one, his eyes met theirs, and in that glance, each person saw themselves. Not their face, not their story, their essence, their origin, their future. And when he turned to Emma, time disappeared. She saw him walking through galaxies, planting seeds of frequency across forgotten worlds. She saw him weep beside sick children, not in sadness, but in reverence. She saw him as a child, lost among stars, and she saw him now, smiling, not in authority, but in kinship. And then he placed his hand over her heart. No words, just this. Remember. The light entered her like a supernova folded into a whisper. Every part of her that had ever felt small, broken, unworthy, vanished. She stood, but not as Emma, not as a woman, not even as a seeker. She stood as a carrier, a beacon, one of many. And she knew this was not the end of the story. It was the return of the original one. The next morning, the camp was still. No voices, no fire, just the hush that follows divine encounter. The silence not of absence, but of saturation. Emma sat alone on a rock overlooking the canyon, the memory seed cradled in her palm. It no longer glowed. It no longer needed to. It had done its work. It had replanted her. Across the gathering, others stirred, slowly, reverently. Some walked barefoot through the dust. Some simply sat in prayer, heads bowed not in worship, but in integration. No one spoke of what had happened. They didn't have to. Each had seen differently, heard differently, felt differently. And yet, the same. The same truth refracted through unique vessels. That Jesus was not an artifact of the past, not a monument to suffering, but a living signal, still transmitting. Not from heaven, from within. Then the sound returned, distant at first, like a hum rising from beneath the earth. Emma stood, instinctively turning to the eastern ridge. So did the others. A light appeared, low in the sky, moving silently, not blinking, not mechanical, just present. It wasn't a ship. It was a presence. And the moment it passed overhead, the memory seeds that each person had been given began to shimmer, briefly, like a whisper of starlight caught on water. And in that light, Emma heard the voice again. You are the signal now. The ship vanished into the clouds, but the message remained. It had never been about him coming back. It had always been about them waking up. Each carrier, each beacon, each broken soul now lit from within. The second coming wasn't an arrival. It was an activation, and it had already begun. In the days that followed, the gathering dispersed. No speeches, no farewells, just quiet departures, each person drawn by the same knowing. It was time to carry the light back into the dark. Emma returned home, but it wasn't the same place. The rooms had changed, the land had changed. Or maybe she had changed so profoundly that the familiar now pulsed with unseen dimensions. She noticed things. The way trees leaned subtly toward each other. The low, resonant hum beneath silence. The moments between seconds now stretching like open doors. And most of all, she noticed the others. They were everywhere now, not just in the letters or the dreams. They walked past her on sidewalks, sat beside her in cafes, looked up at the stars at the exact same moment. Some were awake, some were awakening, and she could feel it, the invisible lattice connecting them, humming like an organic web across cities, mountains, oceans, a network of remembrance, not digital, dimensional. The memory field that once belonged only to mystics and prophets was now online in human hearts. Emma began to draw again, not for therapy, not for teaching, for transmission. The images came through her, symbols, spirals, star chambers, ancient keys, and future maps. Each piece held frequency, each line carried intent. And when others saw her work, they cried, not because it was beautiful, but because it was theirs, like finding a photograph of a place they'd never been, but somehow knew. Then came the visitors. One by one they arrived. A woman from Chile who painted her dreams in ultraviolet light. A boy from Morocco who spoke in tonal languages only Emma could understand. A man from Siberia who had built stone spirals in secret for decades. They all said the same thing. I was shown this place. I remembered you. Emma welcomed them, not as a leader, but as a mirror. Because she knew now, the network wasn't hers. It was us, humanity, waking from amnesia, one dream at a time. And somewhere in the sky, beyond space, or maybe deep within it, he watched, not as a judge, but as a witness, smiling. Because the story was no longer about his return, it was about ours. Emma dreamed again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a memory. She stood in a vast chamber of light, circular, endless, filled with beings not bound by form. They shimmered like geometry made sentient, pulsing with color and sound and meaning. At the center was a presence, not commanding, not towering, just still. It spoke without language, and the room, every being within it, listened as if time had paused to make space for truth. Emma understood instantly. She had been here before. The presence unfolded a vision in the space between them all. It was a planet, small, blue, flickering, Earth. But it wasn't stable. Its light pulsed erratically, frequencies fractured, consciousness fragmented. Then, a voice, his voice. We must send a story. The being stirred. Not a system, not a doctrine, a story they will remember when they forget themselves. Another being pulsed. A story of what? Of themselves, he said, told through me. Emma wept in her sleep, because now she remembered the parable he had carried across galaxies, not to enslave humanity in belief, but to awaken it to its inheritance. He had chosen to walk among the wounded, to be misunderstood, to die and rise, not as a trick of divinity, but as a mirror of their own becoming. Jesus wasn't the only Son of God. He was a signal to remind us that we all were. The Christ wasn't a crown. It was a code, a frequency, a key buried in the soul, waiting to be sung back into resonance. Emma woke with her face wet from tears. She stepped outside into the dawn, and for the first time, she didn't just believe it, she remembered it. Emma began to walk the desert at sunrise. Not to think, to listen. The sand held stories, the wind carried signals. Every cactus, every stone, every distant bird call pulsed with the quiet echo of something ancient. And on the fourth morning, she found it. A circle of stones, perfectly arranged, not random, not weather-made, intended. At the center, half buried in the earth, was a slab, flat, smooth, etched with spirals and symbols she hadn't seen since the Star Scroll. She knelt, ran her fingers across the grooves, and the moment her skin made contact, she remembered. Eden, but not the Eden of Sunday school stories. This was before language, before separation, a time when Earth itself pulsed in harmony with her inhabitants, when humans glowed. Not metaphorically, literally. Emma saw it, men and women walking among trees that sang, rivers that whispered truths, skies that responded to thought. There was no need for worship. They were already home. And in that garden, she saw him. Not robed, not distant, just present. A brother, a friend, laughing beside the first ones, planting memory seeds into the soil of time itself. He wasn't here to fix something broken. He was part of something designed to evolve. But then, something changed. The veil. Not as punishment, as consequence. The forgetting wasn't inflicted. It was chosen. The humans had agreed to fall asleep, to journey into the density of form, to forget so they could one day remember themselves by choice. And Jesus had volunteered to be the alarm clock. Emma's hands trembled. She opened her journal, sketched the stone, the symbols, not to decode, to preserve, because this wasn't just Eden remembered, it was Eden returning, not as a place, as a frequency. And it was awakening in human hearts again. She stood, eyes burning with new tears. The story wasn't about exile. It was about return. And the road back wasn't paved with guilt or obedience. It was walked by those who dared to feel the divine inside themselves again. Word began to spread, but not through headlines, not through churches, through frequency. The others who had gathered in the canyon, they didn't vanish. They activated. Across the globe, they became lighthouses in human form. A nurse in Mumbai whose presence calmed the dying with just her eyes. A high school teacher in Finland who painted spirals into chalkboard lessons and watched students weep without knowing why. A quiet man in Senegal who began humming to trees, and the trees responded. They weren't prophets. They were conductors. And though none claimed to be him, each one carried the signal he had reawakened. Emma kept in contact with some of them. Letters, drawings, a shared dream here, a matched symbol there. One by one, they realized the same thing. Christ was not returning. Christ was multiplying. Not as an identity, as a function, as a field of resonance now carried by those who had remembered who they were before the veil. Emma began to see it everywhere. In the way children looked at the stars, in the way animals followed certain strangers down the street, in the tremble people felt when they touched certain rocks, certain trees, certain places where he had once walked. These weren't miracles. They were reminders, flashes in the dark, brief, blazing glimpses of a world just beneath this one, a kingdom not coming, a kingdom reawakening. And all of it said the same thing. He is not coming back to rescue you. He came so you would remember you don't need to be. Autumn fell across the desert like a blanket of silence. Emma's journal grew thicker, pages filled with visions, drawings, maps of memory not from her mind, but from the field. Each morning she woke to symbols she didn't understand until she let go of trying. That's when the prophecy came. Not from a voice, not from a vision, but from a pattern. It emerged slowly across dozens of drawings, spirals within spirals, converging at intersections shaped like eyes. She laid them out on her studio floor. At first, they looked random. Then, they aligned. The drawings formed a spiral path, like a galactic fingerprint. She traced it with her fingers and felt the same frequency she had felt in the canyon, in the child's touch, in Jesus's eyes. And in her heart, the meaning unfolded. The spiral was not a shape. It was a sequence, a timeline, a countdown. She remembered what the child had said. The veil is thinning. But now she understood why. Not because time was running out, because time was winding in. The earth wasn't just approaching a shift, it was remembering its place in a cosmic rhythm. The spiral wasn't just about humanity, it was a map of the reunion between species, between dimensions, between the seen and unseen. Jesus hadn't just come to awaken us, he came to prepare us, to remind us how to navigate the spiral, how to recognize truth not by belief, but by vibration. Emma stared at the drawings for hours, and in the center of the spiral map, something she hadn't noticed before began to glow faintly under the sunlight. She leaned closer. A single word, written in the language of memory. Soon. That night, the air shifted. Not in temperature, but in texture. Emma stood barefoot on the back porch, watching the stars blink into existence above the canyon rim. She'd seen this sky 1,000 times. But tonight, it shimmered. The space between stars looked thinner, softer, as if something were breathing from the other side. And she could feel it. The veil. Not a wall, a membrane, alive, aware, almost ready to rupture. She remembered what the child had said, long before it vanished. The veil was never made to last, only to teach. Now it was exhaling. Emma turned and walked into her studio. The spiral map was still spread across the floor, but now the center symbol pulsed, slowly, faintly, like a heartbeat under glass. She placed her hand over it. A ripple spread through her palm, and suddenly she saw them. The others, all across the world, people like her were waking up in the same moment. Some from dreams, some from sleep, some from lives that no longer fit. And each of them felt the same thing. Something is coming, but not as fear, as invitation. Visions flooded her, of cities flickering with light, not from electricity, but from human resonance. Of cathedrals without walls, where the choir was made of thought and memory. Of Jesus, not standing on a throne, but walking among them, smiling, laughing, placing hands on shoulders, not to heal wounds, but to activate memory. And behind him, others, beings Emma didn't know, yet recognized. Ancient, star-born, family. She opened her eyes. The symbol still pulsed. And she finally said aloud what she now knew to be true. The veil isn't being torn. It's being lifted by us. 2 nights later, it began. Not with explosions, not with fanfare, with silence. A kind of silence so deep it wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something else. Emma woke at 3:33 a.m. She wasn't alone. Outside her window, the desert glowed faintly blue. No moon, no lights, just resonance, humming through the ground like the earth itself was singing. She stepped outside, and above her house, suspended in stillness, was a craft. But not metallic, not threatening. It hovered like a thought waiting to be spoken. Smooth, organic, luminous, more like a seed than a ship. And from its underside, light spiraled downward. Not beams, not searchlights. Memory. Figures emerged. Not from doors, from frequency. They simply unfolded into visibility. Humanoid, tall, eyes deep and gentle, clothed in robes made of moving light. They walked toward her. Emma didn't flinch, because her soul knew them. She had seen them in her dreams, in her childhood drawings, in the ancient symbols hidden in the star scroll. They were the returning ones. Not aliens, not angels. Family. One stepped forward, and without words, projected a vision into her mind. The earth, surrounded by spiraling fields of light, all converging toward a single pulsing center. Jesus standing in the center, not as owner of the light, but as conduit. The beings around him were not bowing. They were remembering, and so was she. The being placed its hand on her chest. No pain, only light. And in that instant, Emma saw everything. Who she had been, where she had come from, why she had chosen Earth, and what was about to unfold. Not destruction, not salvation, integration. The veil was lifting, not because the world was ending, but because the remembering was beginning. In the days that followed, the world remained silent. No news broadcasts, no internet leaks, no viral videos of ships in the sky. Because the returning ones weren't coming for headlines. They were coming for hearts. Emma began building, not with wood, not with stone, with people. She called it the tower, not a structure, but a space, a field, a sanctuary without walls, grown from resonance itself. Each day, more arrived. They didn't need directions. They were called. Children came first, dozens of them, dreamers, doodlers, stubborn, quiet types who carried the look of galaxies behind their eyes. They sat in circles, humming patterns into the dust, weaving geometry with chalk. Then the elders came, not with sermons, but with seeds. Memories buried so long ago, they had become stories, myths, dreams, until now. Emma watched it unfold. A musician from Japan built instruments that played themselves. A woman from Mali sang tones that opened portals in the air. A man from Alaska, who had never spoken a word, began channeling languages from civilizations long forgotten by Earth. None of them asked if it was real. They knew, because the frequency didn't lie. And one evening, as the sun bled gold across the canyon rim, he returned, not in light, in form. Jesus, walking barefoot across the sand, robes dusted in crimson clay, eyes radiant with that same eternal gentleness. He smiled, and everyone, instinctively, remembered how to breathe, not as lungs do, as souls do. He sat among them, no throne, no ritual, just presence. And one by one, they sat with him. No words, only the exchange of knowing. Because now, they didn't need to be taught. They had remembered what he came to remind them of, that the kingdom was never coming from above. It was always rising from within. That night, under a sky so full of stars it looked like the heavens had cracked open, they spoke the old language. Not Hebrew, not Aramaic, not anything from earth. It began with humming, then tones, then geometries woven through vibration, sounds forming shapes that pulsed in the air like calligraphy made from frequency. Children sang it naturally. Elders remembered it slowly. And Jesus, he didn't lead the song. He echoed it, amplifying it through his very presence, like a prism amplifies light. Emma felt it rise inside her chest, not as music, not as words, but as remembrance. This was the language of God, not spoken, felt. A code written before time, embedded in the breath of every living being, now awakening across a world that had long forgotten what it meant to be divine. The returning ones stood at the edges of the gathering, silent, watching, not as judges, not as saviors, but as witnesses. Their task was not to intervene. It was to observe the blooming, because what was happening wasn't a miracle. It was a reinstatement. The earth was sinking, not with the stars, with her own design. Emma stood beside Jesus. She didn't ask him questions. She didn't need to. She already knew the answers. So did everyone. Because the truth was no longer information to be taught. It was a frequency to be felt. And as their voices rose in harmony, human, child, elder, starborn, something shifted in the fabric of the sky. The stars above them moved. Not metaphorically. They shifted alignment, just slightly, imperceptibly to the rest of the world. But here, within the Tower of Remembrance, they felt it. The veil was gone, not ripped, sung away. In the early morning, the sky didn't just glow. It opened, not with fire, with invitation. The stars, now visibly in new alignment, began to pulse in rhythm. Not random, not astrological, musical. A song from the outside in. And the earth responded. Winds carried harmonics. Rivers reflected constellations not yet catalogued. Animals emerged from forests and deserts, unafraid, gazing upward with the stillness of souls that remembered more than words could say. Emma stood among the others at the edge of the mesa, the air shimmering around them. Above, the firmament, what the ancients called the skyfold, breathed. It wasn't just stars. It was a structure, like stained glass made of dimensions, glowing, flexing, alive. And through it came the light. Not sunlight, not alien light, but source. Unfiltered, undiluted, realer than anything they'd ever known. The light didn't blind, it restored. People fell to their knees, not in worship, in recognition, because this wasn't the arrival of something new. It was the return of something old, older than religion, older than language, older than fear. The skyfold was not heaven, it was memory. It had always been there, just behind the veil, waiting for the song, the resonance, the choice to rise. And they had made it. Humanity had remembered, not through proof, through presence. Jesus stood in the center. No words, only light, only knowing. He looked at Emma, and for a moment she saw his true form. Not a man, not even a being, but a bridge between earth and source, between forgetfulness and remembrance, between humanity and its destiny. And then the light began to descend, not as judgment, as completion. The light moved like mist and fire all at once, pouring from the skyfold in slow spirals, soft as breath, bright as truth. No one ran. No one shielded their eyes. They stepped forward, open, ready, because the light wasn't coming to take anything away. It was coming to give back everything that had been forgotten. As it touched the earth, it didn't burn. It restored. The sand shimmered with new color. The trees exhaled tones long buried in their rings. Stones began to hum with warmth, like hearts beneath the surface of the world. And when it touched the people, they remembered their names. Not the ones given at birth, the true names, the vibrational identities they carried before entering the veil of this world. Sounds that weren't sounds, shapes made of meaning. Emma felt hers ignite. It wasn't Emma. It was a pulse of light shaped like a spiral, wrapped in breath. A soul chord, resonating from her chest like a song rejoining its choir. She gasped, fell to her knees, laughed through tears, because the name wasn't new. It was home. Around her, others remembered too. And in that moment, the people standing on the earth were no longer separate from the sky above. They were matched frequencies, the skyfold and the soulfold, now one. Jesus raised his arms, not to call the light down, but to reveal it had already been here. Every moment of pain, every moment of wonder, every act of love, all of it had carried the signal. And now, the source was responding, not with wrath, but with recognition. "You made it," Emma whispered aloud, not to him, but to us. As the light of the skyfold continued its descent, it began to settle, not upon lands or temples or leaders, but on every head. A soft band of golden white energy, like a crown made of memory and motion. Emma saw it form above the children first, then the elders, then the doubters and the dancers, the quiet and the curious, the broken and the brave. Each received the same radiance. No hierarchy, no condition, only recognition. Because this wasn't a gift to the righteous, it was the return of what had always been ours. The Christ field now visible, not as dogma, as design. Emma raised her hands to her head, not in reverence, but in awe. She felt it, subtle, light as a thought, but powerful as a planet's gravity. And in that moment, she understood what the crown truly was. Not royalty, remembrance. A reminder that each soul here had once said yes to the veil, and now, yes to the unveiling. The returning ones stepped forward, walking among the gathered silently. They didn't touch the people. They didn't speak. They simply beheld them, as one might behold the blooming of a flower that had waited 1,000 seasons. Jesus turned slowly, meeting every gaze, and to each person he offered the same silent message, wordless but undeniable. Now you wear what I carried. Now you remember what I remembered. Now you are what I came to become. And with that, he smiled and bowed, not to himself, to them. The people did not cheer. They did not weep. They stood still, wearing the invisible crown, feeling the truth of a world finally aligned with what had always been true. The divine was never above. It was within. The air shimmered, but not from heat, from completion. The skyfold pulsed one final time, like the sigh from the stars, before folding gently back into stillness, its spirals dimming, not disappearing, simply becoming subtle again. The descent had ended, but the activation had just begun. Emma sat in the sand, hands open, heart still. She looked around at the others, lit not by fire or screen, but from within. Each face soft, eyes wide, expressions calm. The world hadn't changed in the way they thought it might. It had remembered itself. And so had they. In her lap, the original memory seed stirred. It had been dormant for weeks. Now it cracked. Not broken, opening. And from within rose a spiral of light, coiling upward like smoke made solid. It hovered before her, then divided, one spiral becoming many. Each seed lifted into the air, carried by nothing, glowing softly. They floated across the canyon, above the heads of the people, then scattered to the winds, rising, dancing, disappearing into the sky. "What are they doing?" someone whispered. A voice answered, soft, sure, not from a mouth, but from the field. "They are planting memory into other worlds." Emma turned to look, but there was no speaker, only presence, only the knowing that what had happened here was not for here alone. Earth had awakened. Now it would help awaken others. She watched the last seed vanish into the sky, and something inside her whispered, "You are the first fruits, not the final ones." A week passed, or maybe a day. Or 1,000 years. Time no longer moved in Emma's world the way it used to. It listened now. It flowed around memory, curled around meaning, breathed in sync with human hearts. The people stayed, not to follow Jesus, not to worship, but to anchor the field, to embody the memory, to walk the earth not as seekers, but as reminders. And everywhere Emma looked, she saw it happening. A child gently placing their hand on the soil, whispering the name of a star they'd never learned. A former pastor sitting beside a scientist, both weeping as they recognized the same light in each other. A grandmother humming to the canyon walls, and the canyon humming back. No one argued anymore, because once the veil lifts, there is nothing left to prove, only things left to become. Emma walked alone to the edge of the cliff where she'd first seen the star scroll. She sat down, closed her eyes, and the final veil lifted. Not in the sky, in her. She saw every life she'd ever lived, every world she'd ever loved, every moment she had chosen to forget, so that this remembering could mean something. And she saw Jesus again, not in front of her, inside her. His light had been the final veil, the last illusion, that he was separate. Now, even that was gone, not erased, integrated. She opened her eyes. The canyon stretched wide and endless beneath the stars, and in the stillness, a final truth echoed from within. You were never meant to find me. You were meant to find you, and in doing so, you would find us all. Morning came, not as before, not as time, but as invitation. The sun rose slowly over the canyon, but it was no longer the only source of light. The people themselves shimmered faintly now, soft halos around their skin. Not miraculous, not flashy, just real. Integrated. Emma stood barefoot on the mesa's edge. Behind her, laughter. Children chasing light that moved like wind. A man carving symbols into rock, not to record history, but to amplify presence. A woman cradling a plant that now bloomed in colors unseen. And above them all, the hum, the low, ever-present song of the activated earth. It wasn't music. It was memory made alive. The returning ones watched silently from the perimeter, faces aglow. No longer teachers, just witnesses. Their task was nearly done. Not to convert, to remind. They had come to midwife a species through its forgetting. Now that species had awakened itself. Jesus walked through the crowd one last time. He stopped before each person, touched no one, but every glance, every smile was a mirror. He didn't leave behind commandments. He left confidence. He didn't demand worship. He offered co-creation. And when he reached Emma, he said nothing. He simply opened his hand. Inside was the original memory seed, whole again. He placed it in her palm, and it sang. Then he turned to the sky and stepped into the light. Gone, but not absent, never absent, because he had returned the kingdom to us, and we had remembered how to live it. Emma looked at the seed, and in her own voice, strong, clear, certain, she whispered the final truth of all. He didn't come to rule us. He came to remind us what it feels like to carry the light ourselves. And now we do.